Welcome to Sticking to the Truth with Julene Jackson and Debbie Jansen. Hi, Julene.
Hello.
You've been traveling, and I've been writing and working, and it's been a wonderful Easter and spring. And I'm so glad to see your beautiful face. And I'm so glad the sun is finally shining. That's great. But we all have been a little upset about some of the issues that are going on in America. I get really crazy with all the lies, you know that. And
Mhm.
especially with young people who have no idea about how this country started or why our Constitution matters. They like to tell lies about what's going on, but they have no idea of how to support their views with facts. And that drives me crazy, Julene. Jesse Waters does a routine on his show where Johnny goes out on the street and asks the public history or civic questions. And usually he picks real young kids and, young adults in college, stuff like that. Well, I can't tear myself away from watching it. I should, Julian, I should. But there have been a lot of crazy answers, and I just go nuts with these. Once he asked a young man, how long could the president stay in office? And the young man replied, 10, 15 years. And another kid was asked how many states were in America. And he actually, and then he said, oh, about 100. What? I about lost it though when Johnny asked a silly young girl, where did the Vietnam War take place? Now, Julene, she tried 3 times to answer the question and couldn't. She guessed China at first, and Johnny goes, no, Vietnam War. And he said it really slow. He was trying to help her. So she guessed Italy. And he said, no. And she finally ended by guessing Florida. Oh my goodness. I needed to
Yeah.
point out that her crazy was showing, and she might wanna tuck that back in.
Yeah.
Oh, Julie, you've
Well,
got a lot of work. You've got a lot of work to do to help me calm down on this one.
I mean, I know there's great hope for this rising generation, right? But we've got a little bit of work to do, and I think that's what we're gonna talk about today. So good to see you, though. I just came back from almost 2 weeks on the other side of the country. Came home to all my Easter bunnies, but, this really is my favorite time of year. We're in Washington, DC. Everything is, aflame with fire, all the bulbs and tulips and cherry blossoms, and, I just love this time of year for so many reasons. Every year, I don't know, for as long as I've had 5 children, we've done this little resurrection Easter egg hunt where it starts, you open each little egg and there's a symbol of Holy Week, right? And the first egg talks about how Holy Week started with a prayer, right? The triumphal entry, the people shouting at the city gates, Hosanna, Hosanna, which is really a prayer to save us, to help us. And then it ended a week later with the promise of the empty tomb that Christ really can do what he says he will do, and that the validity of that empty tomb confirms that he wasn't just a charismatic street preacher, but that he really was savior of the world. And for that alone, as Christians, we have so many reasons to be hopeful and happy and to be willing to roll up our sleeves and do some hard work. And we have got some hard work ahead of us, Deb, because really almost on our watch and maybe our grandparents' watch, we have allowed, false teachings and lies to be taught to our children, and for God and prayer to be removed from our school systems. And it's really interesting, Debbie, to when you go back and study, like in the 1950s, how these seeds were planted for these things to go about, how these progressive educators by the name of Horace Mann and ultimately John Dewey, who would go on to become known as the father of progressive education, who was an atheist and a secularist, how they got their hooks in our school systems, and how they, wanted to replace mom and dad with the government, and they wanted the state to be the god, and it's really interesting dream, to know that some of these roots took place in the 1950s with Brown versus Board of Education, where, they wanted to force integration amongst black students and to destroy the black schools that were doing very well. If you study, those schools were doing very well. And, it real what it that forced integration did is it opened the doors for the government now to be able to get involved in it. The government actually became like an enforcement mechanism, to determine education for our children, and believe me, the likes of the Horace Mann and John Dewey's, they were tickled pink, and those that were perpetuating those teachings of wanting to replace the family with the state. And then Deb, we learn about this in the Healing of America seminar that a few years later in 1957, when Russia beat us by a few years to the moon, these really enemies of freedom in America spun that to our advantage to scare Americans and go, "Oh, we're falling behind. We need to remove civics and government and history from education, and we need more math and we need more science." And then the globalists, began to introduce this idea instead of civics and history of social studies. Let's just study the social systems of the world. There's nothing really special or exceptional about America. We just, we're just like everybody else. And so, should we be surprised then that our kids are thinking, our grandkids are thinking communism is a lovely thing, that the government provides for all, or that religion and God is, hate speech? And so you can see we're in a little bit of a mess, right? But for those that believe in the promises of the empty tomb, and that as we lean into God, that He can heal all things, He can heal nations, He can heal families, He can heal our children, that we're like, okay, we fell asleep a little bit. Now we're all waking up and we've got some work to do, Deb.
Well, we're waking up because people like you.
Aw.
I love the
Thank
classes you teach on the healing of America and on the Bill of Rights and all the different classes because I'm older than dirt. You see, I grew up in the 50s and I remember being taught how wonderful Dewey was and how wonderful some of the things that were going on was and how they took away from certain things that after I got older, I went, wait a minute, that's not right. And then taking your course, which to all of our listeners, I'm going to be telling you in a few weeks where you can get this class with Julene, and it is wonderful. But to hear you teach on it and to set me straight on exactly what the Constitution means and what civics is all about and how everything works together, it has been an eye opener. So, I need to ask you a couple of questions. I saw an article last week about young people who know very little about civics. It was done by Rachel Wolf, and she reported that the National Association of Educational Progress is sounding the alarm. Defending Education Director of State Affairs. These people have some really wild titles, let me tell you. Terry Stoops told Fox News Digital this: "The primary problem is that most high school graduates know very little about our American government or our political institutions or even our traditions. And so when these individuals get old enough to vote, they're doing so without having the type of foundation of information that they need to make informed decisions in the voting booth. And this drove me crazy, Julie, a mere 22% of eighth graders were proficient in civics. They hardly even knew what different positions were or what they were for. In 2024, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation found in a survey of registered voters that 70% failed a basic civics literacy quiz. That's pathetic. So tell us, Julene, how important is civics to all of us, children and adults?
Right. Well, civics is what teaches us to love America, right? Teaches us about the government, the leading features of the Constitution, how special this land is and, why we need to know and understand what our founding fathers gave us so we can perpetuate it, you know? I mean,
Yeah.
look, if we taught these young people that 200 years after the Constitution was written, we were putting a man on the moon. We went from an ox cart to a man on the moon under these beautiful principles of ingenuity and creativity. I mean, that's what free markets unleash. And within the first 100 years of our Constitution being written, even though we had only 5% of the world's population, 6% of the land mass, we are producing over 50% of the world's services and goods. Now, why is that? I mean, capitalism allows you to try, to buy, to sell, to fail, and it creates something beautiful, right? That if you work hard enough, anything is possible. I mean, that's the American dream. It's not a feudal system or a caste system that history has known, but that if you work hard and, you're willing to try, to buy, to sell, to fail, and to learn from your failings, and then get back up and dust yourself off, that anything is possible. Now,
Dang.
that is a place that I wanna live, you know? And so we've fallen asleep maybe in telling these beautiful stories and understanding these principles. A few years ago, I saw Charlie Kirk speak, and in person in Washington, D.C., and I'll never forget writing down what he said, 'cause I just when you hear truth, it just pricks you in your heart, and he said, educating our children is the most important issue of our time." And I think he
Yes.
understood that, look, what we teach our children, the curriculums that they have in their generation will be the basis of law in the next generation. So we're seeing some goofy laws on the books, and it's because they have been taught, maybe mama has been taught that certain things are acceptable, and so we're seeing laws that are so contrary to what our founding fathers, envisioned for our nation, really against natural law, the creator's order of things. And so, you know, I that's why it begins within the four walls of the home. Deb, how did you teach your children? You've heard me talk about, I had a family devotional with our children for years where we would teach them scripture and constitutional principles and stories of America. How did you teach? And you have grandchildren now. Is it six grandchildren? No, you have more than
Yes.
that. Six grandchildren.
7 and 1 more coming.
Oh, that's right. Okay, congratulations. That's wonderful. So, I mean, we can't just blame it on the government or the president or the school teacher. We like have to look internally. So what are some things that you're doing now to teach, your little grandchildren when they come over?
Well, I have always just believed it's a 24-hour job. So, I admire what you do where you get up and you have devotions and you talk to them about the civics for the day from the newspaper. I think that is fabulous. I wish I had thought of that and done it myself. But what I did with my kids growing up, it was a 24-hour process. So, when we were riding in the car, we didn't listen to a lot of stuff in the car. Nobody had a tablet or a cell phone or anything. We talked. And whatever was going on at school, I would say, "Well, how does that apply to America?" Or how's that gonna apply to your life?" And we played the what if game. "What if somebody's told you this? What would you say then?" And with all the communication that we had with each other, we brought history, civics, faith, relationships, all of that came into the conversation constantly.
Yeah.
So, in fact, the kids even begged me, "Mom, when I do something wrong, just wallop me on the behind," because that was that wasn't what I did. If they did something wrong, I said, "Let's go, living room," and we would go sit in there and talk for an hour
Yeah. So
about why it was wrong and why this shouldn't happen again, and there were a few times they said, "Okay, okay, enough talk. Just slap me or hit me and let me go." "I'm not gonna hit you. That would not be good. Sit down and we'll talk about why that would not be good."
I love that though. You took every opportunity, the good, the bad, the ugly, to teach them,
To
right?
teach that.
In
Well,
the car.
I have a couple questions for you because, um, in not teaching this, what I think has happened is we have young people yelling about and a lot of non-conservative people, politicians, you're destroying democracy. How do you know it's being destroyed if you don't know what it really is?
Yeah.
You know, you got to have the basic facts on what makes up democracy so that you know when it really is being destroyed. And again, Jesse was interviewing one person and asked them about what is democracy, and they could not define it.
Yeah.
And um, what is the difference? And we've talked about this in your classes between democracy and a republic, which we are actually a republic, right, Julie?
Correct, right.
Yeah,
Yeah. We've got this little apartment in, downtown Salt Lake City, so I get to see all the protests, and they have big signs that President Trump is a fascist. And I mean, if I asked them what fascism is, they probably couldn't even tell me, right? But,
right.
the fact that our kids might not know the type of governments that we have, I personally, I keep thinking, well, if my kids don't know certain things, why didn't I teach them? It's like, um, at Easter time, if my kids think that Easter is just about the Easter bunny and egg hunts and, gift cards in their baskets and chocolate and not about the promises of the empty tomb, I'm not going to blame my pastor or my preacher for that. I'm going to look at me. Why didn't I not teach them?
Yeah.
The true meaning of the empty tomb. And so I think, if our kids don't understand the form of governments that we have or the founding fathers and the lives and the sacrifices that they made and the miracles of America, well, why didn't we teach them these things? And so, once again, what if we don't know for ourselves? Well, we live in just an amazing world today where if you have a phone, you can be an instant student and study and learn. So, we have got to maybe identify a little bit more with I'm a student. I'm an active learner. I am here to study the gospel of freedom so I can perpetuate it and teach it to my children.
Exactly, exactly. I love that. That's what I was just sitting here thinking about is that I'm y I think this is what you're saying, but I'm gonna put it in different words. I don't think you can fully understand any problem until you get the basics and you know why it's a problem. Okay. So if we're having problems in America, we need to figure out, first of all, why are we having those problems? And if it's knowledge, then we need to know what were our founding fathers really about and what did they really want for America? Well, they wanted freedom. And I can give you an example. I can't give any names or anything, but I was counseling with a teenager who was mad at their parents. I'm gonna say "their" so I won't say his or her. But mad at their parents, and they said, "My parents just want to control me, and so I think I'm gonna be a Democrat or communist." I think it was communist, he said. "I think I'm gonna go for the Communist Party because then, no one's going to control me because everything just gets paid and everything's okay." And I started laughing. And this kid said, "Why are you laughing?" I said, "Well, you need to investigate that because communism is actually, yes, you get free stuff all the time, but they come in and control you. So you don't ever see your paycheck because they're paying for your house. You don't ever get to go for what you want to go to. You have to do what the government says." And so I said, "I'm going to send you some links." So, the next time I met with this teenager, there I went and said it. He had looked at the links and he said, "Oh, Miss Debbie, I don't wanna be a communist. I wanna be an American." I said, "Yeah, because then you've got freedom." It was knowing the whys and what was behind that that caused him to change his mind.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so good. I mean, we have to be willing to have conversations that might be a little uncomfortable or awkward initially because these young kids are just spewing what they've heard in the classroom or what they see on social media. But, our saw has to be sharp enough that we can engage in the conversation, even if initially, we might have a little pushback on what we're gonna say. I mean, I'll never forget a few years ago when my husband, who speaks a lot on principles of liberty and freedom as well, and often speaks at conferences, and, it was a bunch of red meat, American loving people, and he, said, "How many of you love America? Ah! How many of you love our founding fathers and the Constitution? Woohoo!" And then he said, "How many articles are in the Constitution?" And a couple people, said 7. "How many amendments are in the Constitution?" I think one person said 27. Then he said, "How many amendments did our founding fathers give us?" And it was like crickets. So, in order for us to be able to defend our country and to explain, what our founding fathers gave us, we have to continually be studying. So our saw is sharp. So we feel comfortable and going like, "Oh yeah, I'm ready. I'm ready for this job. I've got something to say." Otherwise, we just kind of slither and talk about, oh, the crazy headlines and the crazy politicians and just wring our hands and walk off. And that hasn't been that's not helpful, to young people. If we just kind of shake our head and say, oh, the world is just going to pot, I mean, we've
Yeah.
got to be able to go, wait a minute here, young lad, let's talk about this, and really, it doesn't take much to convince young people, but if all they're hearing is, teachers that have certain narratives or social media feeds that they're just kind of in a vacuum, they're gonna be misled.
Yep, yep, they are. We have to be diligent. We have to be studying all the time, just like you said, but we have to be willing to open our mouth and share the information we know with other people.
Right,
Well,
right.
I've got a tough question for you. My daughter is a director at a classical conversation homeschool. They are tough on history, government, and critical thinking. And what critical for our listeners, critical thinking at these homeschools that do this is that you give them all the information you can and then you step back and you let them come up with their ideas. And only if they have misinterpreted the information do you step in.
Mm.
Well, I can't believe the facts and issues that my grandchildren are learning. In fact, I have to go to my phone sometimes and check on them. Wait, I haven't heard that. What is this? Anyway, it's all free from social issues that public schools are wasting time on. Do you think it's possible for public schools to give our children the facts about civics without including a prejudice focus? Can they actually teach the truth without pushing their agenda, or do mom and dads need to check up on that?
When we that'd be just a dreamy idea to send your children to school to just learn, the reading, writing, arithmetic, and and just the basics without all this, you know, I hate to say the word indoctrination, that's such an inflammatory word, but that's what it feels like,
It
right?
I'm okay with saying that.
Yeah. Well, Deb, I live in an area where 92% voted for Kamala Harris. So, of course, the teachers and the local leaders and my neighbors and so forth, they're going to have some different ideas. Why would I be surprised, if you live in a big city or, more of a blue state than a red state, that your children aren't going to be hearing some of the ideas and opinions of the teacher. I'll remember a few years ago, my, oldest boy came not oldest boy, but my oldest boy in the home at the time came home with an article, so liberal leaning, and showed to dad, and so my husband picked up the phone, and the teacher's like, "Yeah, I'm sorry, this is what we were told to, have the kids read and then to write a report on it." He said, "You're the only parent that's called and complained, so unless I hear from the parents complaining, I'm just gonna go ahead and keep, teaching the curriculum that I'm told to teach." And so, we can still push back, but that's why it's so important, right? If you're living in an area that has, people and and morals and leanings that are different than yours that you gotta be really precise in how you teach your children. So when they go off to school and they get an article that they know is contrary to how, mom and dad have taught them, they could recognize it because most of these kids are just being duped into thinking, well, this must be the gospel truth if my teacher is giving me this article here. And so I wish we lived in a world where there weren't leanings that you just taught the facts, right?
Yeah.
But that's not the world we're living in anymore, and so that teaching has to take place before you send that child off into the world to be
And we
taught.
just kinda spun this whole conversation around to mom and dad, it's all important what you do. But
Well,
that's the truth, and I tell parents all the time, "You haven't really taught your kid anything until they leave your home and you see them doing what you taught them."
yeah,
So that means that while they're in your home, you have to be present, you have to be working with them, you have to be checking up on things,
yeah,
and you have to know the subject well enough that you can explain it in a way they can understand and accept it as their own way of life.
yeah,
Because if you haven't done that, you can say, no, 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 100 times, and they'll still, once they leave you, they'll go do what they want to do. You
yeah,
have to convince them that what you're telling them to do is the proper way to live.
yeah.
Right, Julie?
Yeah, it was so cute with that little Easter egg resurrection, Easter egg hunt. We were in Utah. So my little 26-year-old daughter made her own for her little home someday and put the little symbols in, and so it's something she did with her she's a newlywed, just she and her husband did it. So on Palm Sunday, so then I said, "Honey, can you bring that little hunt over and we'll do it with the last little babe, our 18-year-old in Utah," when we were there because I didn't bring my eggs from DC. So, I mean, it's the most gratifying thing to see something that you taught your children, now they reteaching, right, to her new husband, and we used her little findings in scripture and testimony in each little egg, and so, it's a beautiful thing to see that perpetuated, and, parents are gonna have to be smart about, the kind of education and grandchildren or grandmas and grandpas, how are we gonna help homeschool the kids? Are we gonna be a part of the co-ops?
Yeah.
Are we gonna pool our money so they can go to a more conservative private school? I mean, all of my kids I have 3 daughters, 2 boys, and all the girls have said, "Oh, yeah, if we're on the East Coast or if we're living near a major city, we are not going to have our kids go to public school because
Yeah.
they got little bits of what it entailed before they, now have graduated, but, so you have to start talking about these things with the kids,
Yeah,
when
yeah, too.
they're 13, 14, 15. Because all my kids now are like, "Oh, yeah, public schools, we're not gonna mess with that because our kids will come out, we won't be able to recognize them when they come home." Isn't that interesting that my children that I only have 1 grandchild, so most of my kids, don't have kids yet, but they're anticipating that is
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
will be.
Yeah. Well, I think everybody should do that because, oh my goodness, we're getting close to time, but this has been such a wonderful conversation. Um, the thing about talking about it ahead of time is that you are preparing for the big explosion, because I believe that America is made up not of states and not of politicians and not of movie stars. America is made up of individual families all across this country. So millions of individual families are determining what America is gonna really be like. And if we're not reading, if we're not studying, if we're not learning, if we're not passing on good information to our children, in 3 generations, we may not have an America. We may have someone come in and take over and make this place something that it should not be. And I keep thinking it's rolling around in my head, and I don't know the full quote. Frederick Douglass said something about, excellence in education, reading and education. Do you?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, with Frederick Douglass is one of our heroes in our home. I have a picture of him in the other room. I think he said something like, "It's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men," and that our destiny is largely in our own hands. and that knowledge makes a man unfit to be a slave. So I love it how he's putting the accountability on us, right? He's not really
Right.
blaming anyone, but I think he's saying, look, mothers, fathers, you shore up your kids, you make them strong in discerning truth from error, because it's a whole lot easier than having to not have taught them and to be silent, and then to have to try and repair now some ingrained ideas. And so, I do know that God said this nation will endure if we turn to Him, and that we can do that with Him, but it's not going to be done on a feather bed, though. Too, I think He
Yeah,
implies
it's
that.
gonna take a lot of work.
Right?
But,
We're
I am encouraged because I also heard a newscast last week that Gen Z adults are turning more and more toward Christ and the church, and they are deciding to walk away from this business of not getting married. They want to get married and have conservative families. So, you know what I think, Julene, since we're out of time, I think we should devote an entire show to the American family. What do you think?
I love it. I think it's time. It's time,
It's time. Well,
Dad.
we will get to work on that. And thank you to all of our listeners for being with us today. You can subscribe to this podcast and join us again. You can ask a question or request that we dig into a specific topic, and we will make it happen. Just write me at Debbie@DebbieJansen.com. And thanks again to our wonderful producer, Ken Jansen. This is Debbie Jansen, and I'm sticking to the truth.
And I'm Julene Jackson, and we hope that you will keep sticking to the truth. We will see you next time.